Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coach's Corner. I am Jeffrey David Hartford, your host and the coach. That's the conduit of optimism, altruism, consciousness, and health. And today I am absolutely blessed to bring to you Dr. Sara Pugh. Dr. Pugh has her PhD in biochem and biophysics. She's a quantum biology board certified coach. She's a circadian ketogenic coach, a hypnotherapist, a neuro Pilates teacher, and just an all around really brilliant woman. And I'm grateful to have her here with us. Dr. Pugh, welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeffrey, because we basically arranged this like 2 days ago because you said, oh, when do you have some time over the next couple of weeks? And I was like, oh, let's just do it tomorrow. So it's great to be here with you to talk about what I really love, which is everything to do with quantum health. So not just light, water and magnetism, but you also touched on something I'm interested in a lot, which is consciousness, which relates into things like gravity and electric charge. But we'll just see where this podcast ends up going, and we'll make sure that we don't throw jargon about, and if we do, we'll explain it, because I think the vocabulary used to describe quantum mechanics or quantum physics or how to apply physics to our daily life is a barrier, and it's not even that complicated, the actual doing of quantum biology or understanding certain aspects of more complicated physics. It's just sometimes the words can throw people. So we'll have to make sure if we say a word, we'll define it. So it's good for people playing Scrabble at Christmas to get some new
That's exactly
vocabulary.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it. I know. And as you mentioned, we kind of just rushed into this. I'm so grateful for your willingness to make it happen. I threw the invite out. I was thrilled that you said yes and to be ready to get started right away. This is wonderful. And, I'm with you. It's your depth of knowledge is far greater than mine and everything quantum, but I've been really into it for several months now. Like many of us, introduced to it by Dr. Jack Kruse, saw him on Rick Rubin with Andrew Huberman, that whole thing. And I've really dug in pretty deep. I've been in the fitness industry for over 20 years now. And, for so long, if people wanted to start to get healthier, everything was just diet and exercise at best. And then there was a little bit of sleep thrown in. So as I start to, peel back the layers of the onion with everything quantum, I try to simplify it for anybody I'm teaching it to just simply say, get back in touch with nature, get outside, get started there. And then the further into it I dig with conversations like this, I get a better, thorough understanding, and I can explain it to people, in a more intimate setting, one-on-one, doing some coaching. But in this capacity, I'm really grateful for it. And again, your depth with all these different things. Are you still actively doing all these things? The neuro Pilates teaching, the hypnotherapy, the keto coaching and such?
No, I taught Pilates and did hypnosis for over 10 years, so I'm just putting that on a pause. But I do, when people ask me questions about rehab, I'll always default back to I did Z Health and Carrick Institute as well, so it would be neurological training. But in the way, it's a bit like quantum biology. The theory behind neurology is mind blowing, but what the actual drills and exercises that people do are so simple, sort of rehabilitating the movement in one joint at a time, incorporating vision and vestibular exercises, which sounds complicated, but it's a lot to do with eyes and balancing, spinning, unilateral movement, and it's all actually quite fun. It's almost like a game, and you can sort of wear an eye patch or have an ear plug in if you've got one side dominant to the other. But the actual meat behind neurology, it can be so complicated it can put people off. So I think it's has parallels with quantum biology, where the theory can be complex, and even more so with people like Dan Winter and Konstantin Korotkov's work, that the physics behind it all, I don't understand what's in their brains, but I understand how it can be explained to a layperson so they understand I'm not just making stuff up and pulling it out of the ether, and actually give people something to do that makes sense, that doesn't make them look stupid either. So that's the whole thing. Because you mentioned about being in the fitness industry, and I know people are very keen to conform or look the same as everybody else. And if somebody comes into a gym and has a red light panel like I do, a miniature one for the near infrared, or wants to wear blue blockers when they're working out, or there's somebody in the corner standing on one leg with an earplug in their ear, doing a single sort of kettlebell raise and drawing a circle, that they kind of stand out. But on the other hand, a lot of people are curious. So sometimes slightly unusual things opens up conversations. For example, my iPhone having a red screen on it. Nobody's ever once asked anything about my blue blockers ever over like 7 years, but pretty much every single person that sees my phone turned red, oh, are you colorblind, or is your phone broken, or and it just starts a conversation. So yeah, definitely making it applicable to how can people improve their daily life? What benefits are there on offer? Because people won't do something unless there's a reward at the end, or they've got a problem that won't go away.
Very true. Yeah, it's so funny you say that. Having been in the fitness industry and working as a trainer in a general health club, Gold's Gym specifically, for years, I was that guy that was kind of the out of the box, wearing my Vibram 5 finger shoes and getting cross-eyed looks, and all the different balance drills and challenging proprioception and so on and so forth. I'm so with you. And here I am wearing my blue blockers from my screen with the red lights on. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And there's more and more people that are beginning to understand it, though. And you hit the nail on the head. It's a matter of providing the information in a way that they feel like, okay, I can do this. This isn't overly complicated. And you're not trying to teach the biochem or the biophysics to me and expecting me to give an answer back. You're just giving me some actionable items that I can do and feel better from doing. And that's exactly what I want. The purpose behind us talking. I love to learn. I want to learn more and more. I love having guests on that are teaching me. I want to provide this information in actionable ways to my audience, and I want to give a platform to my guests to be able to kind of put the information out there and share more with them. So I guess all that being said, without further ado, as you said, light water magnetism, that's kind of the broad understanding of this quantum movement. So if we want, let's get right into it with the light, and kind of just open the door to you, see where we want to let the lights take us, and move from there.
Yeah, okay. So I think right from the beginning with light, first of all, I don't actually fully know what it is in terms of defining it. I'm pretty sure it's a wave and it's like motion, because the more I learn, the more I don't understand. But it basically is a fundamental driving force along with charge in the universe. Because with a human being or biology, we can say, even to a layperson, everything goes to sleep at night unless it's nocturnal, and everything gets up in the daytime when it's light. So that's the primary sort of driver of what our biochemistry does. And then the reason that we have sort of a body clock is that depending on how the light from the sun changes throughout the day, different hormones are released at different times and different bodily functions happen. Like I say to people when I'm explaining that you don't want to like empty your bowels at 3 a.m. It's like a 8 a.m. or activity, or ish. That's a sign of things being on time. And then we sort of have time for being active and charging up, which our bodies are sort of like a solar panel. And then we have time where the electric currents in the body tend, a lot of them shut down at night. So it's a time where we need to have quantum coherence or stillness, so that the reparatory processes in the body, driven by different hormones, especially like melatonin. It's not just a sleep hormone, it's just important for general repair of the body. It's important for cancer prevention and for regulating hormones. So just on a simple level, most people can understand that light and dark are some important kind of trigger. And I just say to people, if it's that important, then if you mess about with it, something not very nice is going to happen. And then they'll say, oh, yes, okay, I sort of get you. And then it's sort of, if we sort of break down lights, regardless of whether it's a wave or a particle or both or vibration, we can say there are different frequencies or wavelengths, which is not strictly the correct definition of what color is, because that's more the phase angle of the photon. But we can say to people, we have this rainbow of different colors and we can see the visible spectrum, but we can't see things like ultraviolet or the near and far infrared, and they're really
Yeah.
important. And then right after infrared, which I think is really interesting, are microwaves, which only recently I discovered that our brains make biological microwaves that are really important for getting into what we'd call a bliss state. So this ties in with why the Schumann resonance is so important, why alpha, beta, gamma waves need to be all in coherence so that we can have a sort of squeezing effect on a vortex in the brain, which is to do with what our consciousness and focus is. And this is actually really important because you mentioned fitness industry and stuff, that a lot of people can't concentrate anymore or focus. And that there's a huge amount linked into light and charge that relates into human focus. So again, I'll just say to people, when you're outside, it's not just the light from the sun that's helping you. That's massively important, full spectrum light. There's also plasma that comes out of the sun. The sun makes scalar waves. I mentioned the Schumann resonance. Then people can be grounded, which is more than just collecting electrons. And what this does is it gives us a state of coherence in the body. And in just simple language, it's much easier to concentrate or focus on whatever you're doing. And they've done studies on this, putting with children in Finland, moving out of the classroom and outside, and all of their scores rocketed, the behavior problems disappeared, and everybody could focus. They got better results. So then I can just say to people in simple terms, there's all of these goodies outside designed to help us, we'll just say, concentrate. Because if you can't concentrate on stuff, you can't really perform properly, whether it's intellectually or playing sport or doing martial arts or whatever it is, playing Scrabble, chess, whatever. And then on the converse, inside, we've got things like artificial blue and pink light. And it's not, the blue light's terrible for focus, but then artificial pink light and also mercury arc lamps and things which are in like supermarkets and LEDs. They're just a massive stealer of our focus and our children's focus, because the kind of waves which come out of digital devices are not the same as natural waves. We've got sort of square waves or waves that don't compress and behave properly. And then to add to that, we've obviously got the unnatural EMFs, the non-native, whether it's devices plugged into the wall, which we're not using, which a very simple thing is just unplug things you don't need. Things like Wi-Fi, several iPhones or iPads or Alexas all open at once that you're not even using. So turn them off if you don't need them. And then obviously buildings are made out of sometimes natural materials and sometimes synthetic materials. So things like aluminium buildings, because of the low dielectrics, that's sort of a terrible environment when it comes to how humans sort of have focus, consciousness, bliss states and things, because it's just not a good environment for sort of mental activities. So straight away, and also we're not connected to the earth, so we're not grounded. So even in simple terms, people can understand that it's probably not the best environment being inside all the time, and there's benefits to going outside. So that's how I usually start with people, without sort of going too deeply into different wavelengths or colors or phase angled photons of light, because that's, again, people sometimes can get overloaded, and other people already know about light and want to know a bit more in detail about specific times of the day, different colors of light. Like a prime example I hear all the time in the UK, people will tell me, oh, I went out for a walk at sunrise this morning just to get my vitamin D. So unfortunately, I have to say something. I have to say, oh no, there's only UVB light for 6 months of the year in the UK and Canada, and it needs to be over a certain UVI index for you to make vitamin D in the first place. So people are like, oh, well, I just thought it was all the same that came out of the sun. And then I might say, well, you did really well because you saw the sunrise. And that's, first of all, really important for setting your master clock. So all the biochemistry, not just the organs, it's like the cell cycle, gene expression, and everything that has timing can be set properly for the day. And people understand that if something's not quite in timing, I sometimes, for men, use an example of classic cars, that if your timing's wrong in the distributor, you haven't set it up properly with your timing gun, you can put all the fancy fuel and carburetors and air filters in the world onto your car. It's just not going to perform properly. And it might even have misfires if you don't set the timing properly. So you have to do that first. And then there's a whole host of exciting modifications you can make later to make the car run better. So it's in a way the same for people, that if our clocks are not in time and we have to run, I think each cell does something between 100,000 and even 1 million reactions per second. And I think we've got trillions of cells. So if that's not running smoothly, the problem of a human misfiring is way worse than, say, my TR7 or my Ford Capri. A human being out of time is going to create all sorts of, I would say, chaos in the body. And then, say, if an airport things didn't run on time, it would be dangerous and it would be extremely frustrating. And people get really angry when the flights are delayed or they get stuck in security. And that's also, people sometimes feel they don't understand about the body clock. But if you say to them, it's sort of like having jet lag all the time, or being sort of constantly running out of time or pressured by time, you just get irritated and things. So there's lots of ways to sort of relate to people how having a good body clock is important and what they might feel if it was off, like feeling tired at the wrong time of the day, or not being able to go to sleep when they want. Or most people know what jet lag feels like, and it affects people differently, whether they eat weird food at weird times, binge, more likely to sort of buy things they don't need in sort of airports, not be able to sleep. People's pain can come back. It can send people's blood sugar all over the place. And all they did was go to a different time zone. And of course, the flight is a big problem as well, but it's also the whole dysregulation of the timing system. So there's basically something for everybody in having a good body clock, because it just means anything else you want to do later is going to, in theory, work better, or you're not treating the cause of the problem in the first place. So that's how I would sort of explain why a body clock's important to people without overburdening them with the details, because it's something that there's about 40 years of research on circadian rhythms anyway. And even if you go to college or university, you learn about cell division and different biological processes happening at a particular time of the day. But it's like, how do the cells know how to do that? That there must be something telling them, because obviously the cells can't look at a watch and think, oh, it's 12 o'clock, I need to make this hormone. And then on another quantum level, a lot of biological activities, for example, DNA replication, when it's getting ready to divide, it makes a magnetic field around it. So magnetism and current or charge massively tie into biology, if not runs it all. Because sometimes trying to tell people that we're all just bioelectronic is a bit too much for them at the beginning. But the more people go deeply into quantum biology, they'll discover all sorts of really interesting electrical things that go on in the body. And there's sort of hundreds of currents. There's not just the DHA and the semiconductors and the currents that power our nerves. There's all sorts of fascinating electronics that happen. I just used the DNA getting ready to divide and the magnetic field as an example. But back to the cells and their millions of reactions, light would be something that's fast enough to control it. And then electricity has to be the thing which sort of does the legwork as well. It's like our charge or our power as well. So again, sometimes people forget a little bit about the electronics in the body, or they come and arrive to it later. And then it makes sense to people then, okay, well, a slow chemical, if people have ever done chemical reactions or looked at what enzymes do, they're actually really slow. Some of them like take half an hour. And then even just to release some dopamine to move my hand, the synapses are really slow and such like. So there has to be something else that can govern the speed at which we do everything. And then we need a medium to do that in. And water is the perfect medium because it can store information, it can store charge, as in it absorbs in the infrared and the UV, so it can act as a storage, but it also can propagate and store information, because the coherent water in the body is not the same as water in a glass. It's called exclusion zone water, even though there's a bit of a debate about that exact wording, or we can call it coherent water or living water. It charge separates. So that means there's an exclusion zone where nothing's allowed in, like a barrier. And then we've got positive and negative charges now separated, which means they can move. And our body does use proticity, as in proton currents, positive electric currents, as well as negative electric currents. So we've got this water, which is this reservoir of, as we would say, charge that's light active, but it can also make sort of micro domains and trap resonance from different sort of molecules or light or whatever. So it's got this huge ability to be able to be a medium in which all of this can happen. And then on top of that, we've got the fourth phase of matter, which is plasma, that a lot of people don't talk about, which is all really important in quantum biology because we basically are in plasma, and 99.999% of the universe is made of plasma, which is just charge. So actually atomic or solid matter is pretty rare in the universe. So the plasma is a really important part of this as well, because it leads into things like our aura, which is a cloud of charge, but also melanin heavily associates with bioplasma, which is just plasma in the body. So the bioplasma can give melanin some of its extraordinary electronic properties. So it's way beyond just a suntan. It can act as a semiconductor, but also a superconductor as well, something that physicists didn't really know existed until something like, I think, 1911, or it might have been 1931. And with its association with plasma, this allows melanin to be this sort of really exciting, important, interesting molecule that's just sort of another part of the bioelectronics of the body. And melanin lines our senses as well. So it and the plasma are our route to the outside world, because we are just basically a thing which receives sensations, and then our brain adds meaning to them and processes the world and puts filters in it and has biases, and then we call it reality. But the things which fascinate me is what actually allows all of this to happen. And quantum biology is the route to sort of really understanding this. And without light, we can't charge up properly. And without charge or electricity or plasma or whatever you want to call it, we can't function. So nobody can really disagree with any of that, because when we've passed away, that's when our currents no longer run, and there are other sort of aspects we could go into. But it's one of these things that if people sort of sit down and think about it, even if somebody doesn't understand the actual words of electronics, they can realize it's important. Because I said we're not going to get people hung up on jargon. A superconductor just means the electrons can travel indefinitely without losing energy. So that's like infinite power. It's not like when we plug something into the wall, we have to draw charge through a wire, and the current flows and it makes a field, but there's a resistance in the wire. So we have to put effort in, just in simple terms. Whereas being a superconductor in the body, which melanin has been proposed to do, Dr. Adam Adamski is a big researcher in this, just to make sure that people know I'm not making it up. So this idea of melanin and electrons and plasma and water allowing us to indefinitely sort of run an electric current without resistance, I think is really important for people, because we all want more energy as well, as long as we all want more focus and we all want more energy. And then overall, the better all of this functions, the light, the water, the magnetism in the body, the more power or energy or redox or electricity or whatever you want to call it we've got to mend things. The immune system's heavily dependent on electric currents, if not wholly, which a lot of people aren't aware of. So this idea of having as much charge, maybe we could call it having high redox, being able to hold on to our energy, not leak energy out, makes sense to people, as in, why would I want to go down this rabbit hole of the quantum biology? What's in it for me? And is there any science to back up any of this? And there actually is tons of science. The whole plasma studies has gone on since the 1900s, and then Albert St. Georgi understood way more about the bioelectronics of the body than people realized. And he unfortunately got sort of suppressed and pushed around and put in a muscle lab. And then over the decades, there's just all sorts of research that pops up. And because scientists and the establishment don't like anything that challenges the mainstream narrative, it's actually other scientists and the establishment that stop this kind of information about physics, water, deuterium, redox, non-destructive charge collapse, entanglement, action at a distance. They're the ones that stop it from becoming mainstream, because they've got their own dogma and their own agendas. So I think that's why some people might say, yeah, but there's loads of papers all about biochemistry. Why is there less about all of this? And then when they look into the kind of things you could achieve understanding quantum physics and quantum biology, it's not the kind of thing that is conducive with the biochemistry paradigm, which is basically the pharmaceutical company. So it's a window into showing people they're actually a lot more than they are. And there's ways to tap into these. And like you said, if people didn't understand any of that, just being outside, all of the things I've described are out there for you. So you can't make melanin really inside unless you've got artificial lights. Um, Being outside, the near infrared and the other aspects of infrared are going to help expand and charge your water battery. The overall like solar yield of the sun, we can just think about being a solar panel and charging up, and then we can be grounded, which is another way to gather electrons, and then we extend into sort of the part which people thought was esoteric, as in the aura, which is just charge. And Dr. Konstantin Korotkov is probably one of the greatest aura studiers, along with huge aspect more quantum biology, and he uses gas discharge to measure it. And we can just, even if people don't want to believe in anything other than the aura being a cloud of charge, it's just more charge or electricity for us. And being outside, especially near the seaside and in nature, is just a really good sort of aura expanding sort of environment. So everything to do with what I've been talking about can be accessed outside, and for sure there's more of these things in different places in the world. So if somebody doesn't live somewhere like the equator, not to worry. There are different benefits to different countries, is what I've found.
Well, that's incredible. That all started with your touch of humility of saying when light, because you've learned so much, you're not exactly sure what to call it, and yet went on that nice stretch of information dumped to people that it really all makes so much sense. And there's this sense that we get, as you touched upon there. You might not need to understand it, but if you just apply it, you feel it. And
Mm,
yet, as you touched upon, this whole paradigm of what I'm calling disempowerment, this
yes.
system that's in charge right now, they've got people so programmed to say, well, where's the literature on this? I can't find it, but I find all this literature over here that says the other thing is true. Meanwhile, they're so smart, but they can't come up with an answer why they feel horrible abiding by the paradigm that they're in and following that dogma. And if they just tried to shift things and feel how much better they would feel, the number of people that are applying the quantum biology side of things without worrying about understanding it intellectually to be the professor of it. But man, are they reaping the rewards of just simply getting up with the sun, getting outside, exposing their eyes and their skin to the sun, sure, without staring directly at it, of course, but just letting those rays charge them, or whatever we want to call it, as you alluded to, right? But it's wild to me how you really just touched upon all three of the phases: the light, the water, the magnetism, and really all of it comes back to the light, and more aptly put, natural light, because what we're experiencing with the artificial light is so much of it, in the name of energy efficiency, is harming us at a cellular level and potentially causing all the disease. We do, as I touched upon at the beginning, we often think diet and exercise. And diet gets blamed a lot right now, and maybe in some capacity, rightfully so. But we know that even if you're eating the proper nutrition profile for your body to get the nutrients that it needs, you still need exposure to the natural sunlight in order for the mechanisms to take place, right? So putting foods into the body is one aspect of it, but we've just got so much of the food that is so hyper processed and loaded with chemicals and all these toxins that we're putting in, while people are infighting about which side of the dogma that they want to follow and give credence to. But so much of this just makes so much sense. And you mentioned the aura. There's something about that, even if we don't really understand the science behind it, there's an energetic side to it that if you're paying even a little bit of attention, you just can pick up on it. Somebody walks into the room, if they've got a good positive aura, there's an energy about them that enters the room before they do, and they light people up. And conversely, if they're on the other end of that spectrum, like so many people, their energy is just sucking away from everybody else. They walk around like Eeyore, just moping around. They've got the cloud over them, and they're so sad at all times because my sense, I would imagine you'll be able to confirm this. My sense is, at a cellular level, the mitochondrial level, their cells, their system is just so bogged down and chaotic that they just don't have the energy they're looking for. And again, they don't necessarily need to understand why. They just need to get the information from you and apply it.
Oh, absolutely. And then just before I add on to the aura, I was just thinking about strongman competitions and how I've
Mm-hmm.
never seen one done inside. And
Mm,
they always do them like on sunny days. And they've now moved all the strongman pretty much all to sort of hotter, better climates. And I don't think they could do. Okay, fair enough. You can't really find a room big enough to pull aeroplanes about in. But then
fair.
people I know who do it, because I think it's a really interesting sport because it includes the family and it's not violent or anything. And I have wondered for a long time, would they be able to do all of that as well and get all of those amazing results inside? Because that really is pushing humans to the limit. And I've always wondered about some of the Olympic sports are always outside and some are always inside. So I wonder if people did gymnastics exposed to the open air, whether people could like evolve to a new level of gymnastics, because soccer and
Mm,
rugby are always outside and so are tennis. And it's just I'd like to sort of look at a correlation. I know nowadays there's so much training done indoors and under artificial blue light, which is a really big problem for athletes because it just the injury rate is enormous, and so is the age of retiring now, which I think for athletes listening who might sometimes think what we're talking about is woo. It's actually, in terms of athletes or fitness, like yourself, injuries were what stopped people going to the gym. It what made them sit on the sofa and watch Netflix and eat Doritos.
yeah.
So I think the even if people just sort of don't understand the other aspects yet, just the idea of having less injuries, I think is really important for any sports person. And then the thing about the aura, the actual science is pretty well studied. It's just like you said that a lot of it's withheld, and the Russians started off with Chilean photography, and
Mm,
then in secret and in peace, they've just been within reason. They've been just been allowed to get on with it. So now they've got sort of Chilean photography on steroids, just using a sports thing that the gas discharge is just next level. So it's unarguable that it exists, and there's things that can make it bigger or smaller or break it, and it correlates with sort of problems. But like you said, with rapport and attractive forces,
mm,
that's again about gravity, which is sort of charge compressing to the 0 point and sucking or drawing something towards it. And we have lots of vortices or vortexes in our body, and the heart is like it vortexes blood. It sort of throws it out of the ventricle and it creates a vortex, which is creating gravity, which also creates implosion or neg entropy. And again, this idea of doing everything from the heart or heart waves is something that people know they should do, but actually, when you really feel it and understand, it does make a big difference. And the heart's biofield's massive; it extends way out of the body, and that's been proven many times over. And then it was back to our saying about the harmonics in a person, that the Schumann resonance being one outside. Then we've got the Mayer wave, which is the actual fluid timing of the heart. Then we've got the
mm,
craniosacral pump. Then we've got the alpha, beta, gamma, and delta waves, which things like heart math and all the science behind that's all correct. So if all of that is working properly and it's all imploding and collapsing charge, obviously that person's going to radiate out. We can just call it something that attracts others.
mhm,
And we all know people who've got this kind of personality. And then we also know people who are sort of all discoherent. Like they're not a bad person, but they just seem to repel other people. So fundamentally, what people talk about with the law of attraction, you can make up plenty of nonsense and con people with that. But actually, the proper law of attraction is an extremely physical process. And to be able to get all of these things into coherence, being inside and around a phone all the time and blue light is not conducive for having
mhm,
coherence. And the good thing about it is, I know people can't just suddenly move everything and have their house outside. Just going outside will basically line everything up, charge you up, and then you can come back inside, and it doesn't just poof away.
Mm-hmm.
We're extremely interesting in that way. We're not a plant and has to be constantly connected to the earth and outside. We've got facilities and molecules that store light and charge and such like. So anything going outside is going to be beneficial. And again, the whole thing about hugging a tree and being in touch with nature, like you said, people just need to do it and experiment. But for most people, if you upset them and they get angry, they'll storm off outside and go for a walk. So we kind of do it anyway. And also, a lot of people will tell me that they went away on holiday and it was really sunny and they've got a nice tan and all their acne and their problems and their gut issues and their depression and their everything went away. Or people will say that they ate food, that they wouldn't normally on holiday, but stayed the same
Mm-hmm.
size. So that there is sort of, I'm not saying that I'm absolutely categorically against processed food and high deuterium food and food with horrible quantum information or food with a huge amount of financial incentive behind it
Mm-hmm.
that has got no interest in the consumer. Like generally farms or farm shops or organic farmers, they actually want the customers to benefit from what they're producing, whereas the big food companies just don't give a shit at all. So sometimes it's just follow the money.
Yep.
But sometimes people have found that when they've been out and embraced with nature, they were able to enjoy foods they wouldn't otherwise enjoy, and it didn't have the usual catastrophic health things that happen. So there's a lot to it.
Oh, for sure. You started all that with talking about the strongman and being outdoors, and I
Yeah,
really have the sense that I know there's a big cost that comes with this, but for some of the larger health clubs, if at some point they could build more of an outdoor space or even a retractable roof, just some
yeah,
way to, when the weather permits, get outside, make sure we're really maximizing that, because it's amazing how just being outside, and we all know on a sunny day we just feel better whether we know
mm,
why or not. And even though those of us that study it understand that you're still getting some rays when you're outside on a cloudy day, it's still going to be more effective than being indoor under artificial light that seems brighter. That those lights are so bright artificially with the wrong spectrum of light. We're still benefiting from being outdoors. And from the food perspective you touched upon, for sure, it's amazing. The more we start to look around and see local farms, get a relationship established with these people, and see how much they care about the land, the soil, if they're raising animals, the animals, even though sure at some point that animal's life will come to an end, in so that we can feed off of that and benefit from it. That relationship with regenerative agriculture, feeding the organic matter back into what's now essentially dirt. In the conventional agriculture here in the States, especially, all the chemicals that they're using in this monocrop culture, depleting that soil down to just dirt. That's why they need to keep spraying things on there. So you're spot on. These larger food corporations, they really don't give a shit about people's health at all. It's about profit. And they'll talk out of both sides of their mouths and say that it's because they need a larger crop yield to feed more people because there's so many of us. But and they're shipping it around the world and using all the fuel to get it across to somewhere that they really shouldn't be eating it anyway. And I guess this will be a pretty good segue into more of the ketogenic approach that you've got, that circadian ketogenic. I'm definitely curious about that. I hadn't heard that distinction of, it kind of makes sense to me, but with food choices, nutrition as a whole, there's a concept of trying to eat seasonally and eat locally. And to take that to that next level of doing it with this circadian ketogenic approach, what does that entail?
yeah. So when it comes to sort of simple seasonality, say like Canada or the UK, we have a distinct summer when I'll just use the UK for an example. We don't have like a huge amount of solar yield, and I say the UVI or UVI index goes up to
Mm-hmm.
probably 8 at the bottom of the UK, which is like the 49th or 50th latitude, and it might get up to 7 if you're lucky where I am. So that means the kind of plants that we grow here tend to be not very sweet. So, we have brassicas and we have apples and we have berries and we have mushrooms and we can have pears, but we don't grow things like sugar beet or what else wouldn't grow here? Pineapples and
Hmm.
bananas and mangoes and those kind of very sweet fruits, just because if you go down to the equator, there's just far more light. And with how photosynthesis works, which is actually very interesting, but in simple terms, if you've got more light, you can just make more glucose.
Hmm.
So you can get sweeter plants. So it wouldn't make sense, really, even just on that simple level, to eat very sweet fruit in a country where our summer, you can't really sweat enough to deplete deuterium.
Hmm.
Like when I went to El Salvador last month, that's where all the tropical fruit grows. So I was literally having a sauna all day by just moving about. So, and I would deplete the deuterium. And the deuterium is something, there's more of it at the equator, and deuterium's in carbs. Like glucose is a hydrated sort of carbon molecule, and it's going to be higher in deuterium, so about 150 parts per million, and a fat
Hmm.
would be like 120. And deuterium's heavy hydrogen, and to
Yeah.
be healthy, we want it to be below 130 parts per million. So this just says we shouldn't be really over consuming things which contain a lot of deuterium, which is processed food and seed oils, which are astronomically high. But then, say in a country like the UK where we don't have that much sunlight, with the kind of plants which are supposed to grow here would generally be the more lower carb and the lower sugar kind of plants.
Hmm.
So there's, for some people in ketogenic diets, say if somebody had a problem like epilepsy or bipolar or neurodegeneration or
Hmm.
cancer, I think that would be an occasion where people could just do a ketogenic diet and just leave out the carbs because they're using it for medicinal purpose, and there's lots of studies. And then when it comes to the metabolics of a ketogenic diet, first of all, it's going to have less deuterium in it, and then the mitochondria make deuterium depleted water, so you can sort of further flush the deuterium out if you want a simple language.
Hmm.
Then when we use fat as a fuel, it provides more electrons, and the way the electrons move in the mitochondria and go down the electron transport chain, it's a less inflammatory fuel because the electrons skip over the first complex, which can leak electrons, which in this instance would be free radicals. So it's less inflammatory, and it also makes twice as much water. So a ketogenic diet is going to make more water, and that's deuterium depleted, and you're going to be producing fuel in a less inflammatory way. I have looked into the research on ketones themselves having beneficial effects, and I don't dispute that they do. But I think from a physics perspective, the extra water and the lowering of deuterium and the less inflammatory activity in the mitochondria is also another reason why ketogenic diets work, and which is why I'm against people to say, well, I'll just take exogenous ketones then. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, good luck to you. Maybe if you were doing a keto diet as well and the quantum. Um, so that would be for medical. And then there might be some wiggle room. Say somebody in Mexico or somebody in Finland, there might be a bit of wiggle room of how much carbs that person could have and still stay in ketosis. Because, like everything, even though you could have the most gigantic conversations about woo with me, and there's nothing that is too woo, still people have to go back to basics and measure things like ketones and blood sugar and stuff if they're doing a keto diet properly, because the medical ketone level, there are particular levels like over 1.5 millimolar, and then you can go higher for certain conditions. And just to be in nutritional ketosis, it needs to be over zero point 0.5 millimolar. So some people will tell me, oh, I'm doing keto. And I was like, well, what's your ketones? And they say,
Hmm.
I don't know. And it's like, well, how do you know? You have to test stuff. You have to do the basics as well. So that would be the benefit of doing, say, just a straight ketogenic diet without any carbs, or limiting carbs depending on your environment. So
Hmm.
that would normally, for most people, if they stick to 25 grams of carbs or less, that's going to put them in ketosis. And then there's lots of ways to change the ratios of fats to protein, because too much protein can also sort of bring people out of ketosis.
Sure.
So, but on the other hand, for other people that want all of those benefits, to actually be in ketosis all the time is not useful either. Because I did this as well, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll just be in ketosis for 2 years and I'll become a superhuman, when I didn't know any
Hmm.
better. And sure, there's probably a small population of people that can, But for the rest of the population, if you keep just running the electrons that way through the mitochondria, it's not the best way to make energy. And also people's uric acid goes up. You can get thyroid going down, other hormones going down as well. Because in times of abundance, say in the summer, the body expects abundance in carbohydrates. And if you don't give it the apples or the berries or the other vegetables that grow in the UK, we can sense it all, and our body clocks and everything know, oh, it's summer, why aren't we having this produce? And what it'll do is it'll just try and constrain energy. And I have looked at hundreds of labs, and I do see like people can get low thyroid and symptoms accompanying low thyroid from doing keto too long and too strict, or they can get really low leptin, because predominantly leptin's a circadian hormone, but again, as it's an energy accountant, it will have some aspect of accounting food electrons coming in. So, and even I sometimes see people who've got kind of low thyroid, but they don't have any symptoms, because there's more to the whole thyroid than just how much thyroid's in your blood. There's a lot more, how much is going in the cell, how sensitive are your receptors. But on the whole, it'll work great. And if people just do too much keto for too long, the body will eventually be not okay with this. So it doesn't mean, oh, I know, I'll just stop my keto diet forever. All people have to do is maybe just have a two or one to maybe even three for some people days when they would reintroduce some local and seasonal carbs. So this will sort of please the progesterone, please the thyroid, please the leptin, and also it runs electrons through that leaky complex in the mitochondria, and it's important for sort of autophagy, because it'll blow up all the weak ones, which is good. We want them gone. And also in terms of electromagnetics, there is sort of time information contained in a light wave, because all transverse waves have two parts. They have an up and down like this, and then they have one that runs magnetically perpendicular. So that's why with light, it's not just like a snake going up and down, it's like two snakes. So there is information about your location and the season contained within the fruit. So it's again, you would want to choose the carbs there's the right season for you and your country, which will be different all around the world. And I did actually make a whole document about looking up what's seasonal and what's not, because you can grow things in greenhouses and hydroponically and trick people. So it's about knowing what's supposed to be growing in this climate. And I found actually there's really old gardening books from sort of like the 1950s. There's a whole series of them, and I've looked for ones for different countries, and they're actually quite a good way to think, okay, in the 1950s and 60s, which different plants would people have grown in their country? Because there's a book and instructions of how to grow these different things. And obviously in the UK, it would just be the traditional breeds of things before anybody invented pink ladies and all sorts of other flavor saver tomatoes and things like that. So you can actually find out what would have normally grown. But and all of these old books are always available in some random library, or there'll be some senior that, because I love seniors, they're a kind of wealth of information that will have the whole like series on their bookshelf for me to look at. So that would be the sort of rationale behind doing like the adding the carbs. Then if we think about the UK and Canada or Scandinavia especially, that some of them are islands or very fish sort of based countries. When it comes to the winter, not a lot grows. So it would make sense to do a more animal-based way of eating. And yes, you might be able to find certain plants, because there are certain people, regardless of season, just hormonally, because of their thyroid or whatever, they do need to have a break from keto. And for some people, it's every 3 weeks. Some people, it's once a week. And as long as the carbs are introduced in a controlled way, obviously, if people are prone to sugar addiction or binge eating, they need to work on the quantum stuff a lot. There's a lot to be said about quantum and overcoming these kinds of eating problems. And it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. I'd say give it a year or 2 years. It's a whole different approach to looking at food. Because I think with the whole sugar addiction, binge eating, people are just told to abstain, or they have groups, and secretly deep down they really want to eat the cakes all the time anyway. And if somebody gives them one cookie, boom, that's it. Whereas really they just want to not think about it. But that's sort of another topic. And then there are some people who happily just do keto or carnivore all winter. And personally, for me, for carnivore or animal based, I eat raw as much as I can, just again for different quantum reasons and
Hmm.
nutrient absorption and other things to do with the microbiome. But they're, overcooking food and obviously cooking food in a microwave is just a disaster for the information that's contained in food. But then
Yeah,
obviously people can just eat what they want. I just happen to really like raw. And I just experimented with over years. So that would be the reason why in those colder places that you would do sort of keto in the winter. When it comes to equatorial countries, which their seasons are different, like they have a rainy season and then a sunny season, whereas the temperature remains pretty much the same, it would have to be sort of a person by person um, sort of analysis. And also,
hmm,
all of this is completely void. If somebody lives somewhere hot and they never go outside, they shouldn't be eating bananas and loads of fruit,
hmm.
because you've got to earn it by being outside in the light where the fruit is, not just inside and think, oh yeah, the strawberries are all in season, I'll just gorge on them. You've got to actually be out, so the light that gets on you and your microbiome is the same that it puts in your mouth, which is why sort of fruit picking is a really good family activity that people can do because they have to go outside to get it.
That's
Um,
awesome.
so yeah, that's sort of where the circadian aspect comes in. But also you can go to other levels of eating windows, as in don't eat when it's dark.
Hmm.
Then you can do things like, say, using fastings. Say somewhere when I was in El Salvador, I'd never wanted any lunch because I was just outside, playing in the sea or in the sun. So I was just being a super solar panel, and it wasn't like I was deliberately missing it. I just really didn't want it because I was getting all of my energy, especially from the UV. So
Hmm.
adding in food electrons then probably would have just interrupted the system as well. And then again, on a sort of timing level, eating 6 times a day isn't really a good idea for liver clocks. And then people will then do things like waking up in the night with weird blood sugar and stuff like that. So there's lots of levels in which you can unpack sort of circadian ketogenic diet. But the main thing about it is it's not being in keto all the time, because I think that could be a barrier for people who want to do change their way of eating, and something inside them says, oh yeah, but I'm going to have to do this for the rest of my life and I can never have a fry again, and it puts them off. So sometimes the idea that I have to do this for 3 weeks and then I can have an apple, it's not so constraining mentally for people. And then other people will go keto or carnivore, really love it and never want to go back. But again, exactly
Hmm.
as you emphasize, you have to try it and you have to give it a chance and you have to give it time and you have to, as much as you can, do it properly as well.
Yeah, no, that all makes so much sense to me. And, it's, I have the sense, I'm curious. I guess the quick question is simply maybe where your ancestors are from versus where you currently live will kind of throw a little wrench in this. But, if we do follow this eat local, eat seasonal based on where you live, by season, you could, if we want to call them names, you could be keto for one stretch, carnivore for another stretch, and then much more plant based
Mm.
while still keeping some animal based in there based on your seasons. And there's something about that that just feels, from a common sense perspective, like it really makes sense to me. And two things before I forget. We've thrown around the word redox a couple of times, so I'd like to get a little bit of an explanation to people of what that is, and just a quick, I guess, caveat with the deuterium. I learned that deuterium freezes at a higher point than deuterium depleted water. And I have a couple of different brands of spring water that come from colder springs that I've been keeping out in my garage, which is not heated, not insulated. And it's single digits here. I'm in New York, and my water was not a solid thing of ice this morning. It was very cold, but it did not freeze over, which gives me that confidence of saying, okay, good, there must be a much lower level of deuterium in this water if it's not freezing in my garage when it's single digits outside. So just something I
Yes.
wanted to
So with
throw at you.
deuterium, when it comes to say a lump of ice,
Mm-hmm.
the when it melts, the runoff is going to have less deuterium because the
Yeah.
deuterium is going to stay in the ice for longer. because it's harder to pull the hydrogen bonds the van der Waals and the bonding and the attraction between the deuterium, the D2O. So yes, so for that, if people, you can buy deuterium depleted water that's sort of glacial runoff, or
Mm-hmm.
you can freeze your water, and then you could either half freeze it, and obviously the juice is going to be the
Mm-hmm.
less deuterium and the lump of ice is going to have more, or you can do it the other way around. You can freeze a big lump and thaw some of it, and that's going to have less deuterium in it. So there's sort of natural places on Earth where there's less deuterium, and the amount of deuterium is always increasing for all different reasons. So it's again another problem, like the magnetism of the planet's always decreasing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's again, and the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere due to 5G as well. So as human beings, we're constantly being the odds are stacked against us. So
Mm-hmm.
it's all the more reason to do more quantum things. If the Earth's generally less magnetic overall, you need to go outside on it longer. And then if there's more deuterium in the environment, then you have to be more vigilant about deuterium containing foods, and to take on board that even if people want to say keto's a load of woo, if you look at it from a deuterium perspective, it's low deuterium, and it's just common sense. And there's 30 years of research anyway on deuterium, and it's well known that if you drink pure deuterium water, deuterated water, you'll die in a couple of days. When I used to use it in a lab to do NMR, it was strictly forbidden to sort of even attempt to drink it, and it had a big toxic label on it, and we couldn't understand, but it's just water. So yeah, that's also sort of an important factor about the deuterium. So with deuterium, I appreciate the water's expensive. So for people who are listening, you can deplete deuterium with a keto diet or saunas or cold
Mm-hmm.
thermogenesis yourself. And if you want to try the deuterium depleted water, don't just have the water and don't bother to do any quantum, because you'll just waste the water basically. So for some people, buying the water can be the catalyst to get them to do other things as well, because they don't like wasting money. And most people who've bought a really expensive supplement, because I used to be into all of that, you try really hard when you've spent money on something. So
Very true. Yeah, which then what are we really giving credit to? Is it all the effort you put in, or is it the supplement? If you tried really hard without the supplement, you might have seen some good results as well.
or if somebody sold you some saline and told you it was some really fancy SARM or peptide,
Yeah,
psychologically from the placebo effect, and I'm sure that would happen, and I'm sure it does happen, that there are supplements that are not what they say they are, and people love the packaging and the marketing, and they believe all the testimonials that it works, even though there wasn't any of the active ingredient in the product to start with, or very little. But yes,
for
it's all
sure.
a whole thing. And also, you wanted to ask about redox,
Yeah.
because I think it's something that there's lots of different ways to explain it, because it's in one way we can think about biochemical reactions, that it's reduction and oxidation, and that just
Mm-hmm.
means passing electrons and hydrogens about. So if you had a deficiency in electrons and hydrogens, it just means you've got less ingredients to move about, making chemicals and things and running chemical reactions, because every biochemical reaction, or pretty much all of them, are a redox. So there's a reduction and an oxidation, and
Mm-hmm.
electrons and hydrogen move around, and that's one definition of it. Then we can think about how much charge we have. So when it comes to membrane potentials, like, they do have slightly different ones, but the number sort of quoted medically would be I like very healthy is minus 400 millivolts. So again, negative charge is what powers biology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when a person's redox or charge goes up to minus 200, that's a very sick person, and everybody agrees. And then we've got different sort of charge on cells, that if the cell's membrane, if the charge is too high, like a cancer cell, it's well documented that cancer cells have less charge and less water, and there's something wrong with them, and they don't work properly and become a problem. So in terms of the cells or the overall organism, the more negative charge that we have, the better. Then as
Mm-hmm.
an electron is negatively charged, we can think that the more electrons we have, the better our redox. And then another way to look at why electrons are so helpful is that too many protons, as in H plus, not molecular hydrogen, and not enough electrons, is sort of a simple equation for an inflammatory state, but it also explains why some people try to say about alkalizing diets and being acidified. It is true that biochemically, if somebody doesn't have enough electrons and too many protons in the mitochondria or say in the body, that they can be acidified, but you don't fix that by drinking juices. You know, you've got
Mm-hmm.
to fix that by making sure your electrons are not escaping and leaking out, and making sure you get more electrons in the first place, and then you can hold them in. And that's where it loops all the way back to our exclusion zone water. Like I was saying, that's a great big reservoir of electrons. So if we don't expand our water in the body by just being inside around too much tech, which will deplete it,
Mm-hmm.
and blue light will deplete it potentially as well, and not enough time outside in the full spectrum light and the infrared and the grounding, then we would lose charge and have low redox, because we didn't have enough water. Um, and then there are then again, I would add in, just because I don't want to always just look at the body just internally, because that's a very sort of myopic view. If we look more outside about the aura, again, I think a lot of people who are very scientifically minded forget that it's a great big cloud of charge. But then people who are more right brained and therapy based and into energy will swear blind that people get better when their auras get bigger and better.
Mm-hmm.
And I completely believe them. But also scientifically, I've looked into it a lot myself. So again, that could be a source of redox problem. Another thing which is interesting, if we think about pain in the body, it can either be that the nerve there just can't take all of the charge that's coming down and it burns out and you lose charge, or you can think of the body and the universe being fractal, and pain is like a broken fractal that's leaking charge. And when you've probably worked with people who are actually in a lot of physical pain,
Mm-hmm.
they don't have, it's very draining to be in pain. And, you know, even though they don't really do much, they're just tired all the time. Or some people resort to overeating, either emotionally or just there's something about trying to refill the charge. So also being in physical pain is not fixing it, because there's lots of ways to fix pain, but that's a potential way to lose your redox. And people who are quite new to this will know that being in pain is something that's very draining, and other people will know that that drives them to addictive behaviors or sort of high energy molecules. And then, sort of from a quantum level, even if they can't actually fix that particular pain, they can do other things to bring in more charge from the environment, from grounding, from outside, from water, and
Yeah.
keep the charge. So even if that pain is leaking charge, it's not going to be as much of a problem, because it's not as painful, because they've filled themselves up, or their redox is better, and they've got much better chance now of being able to take more action to actually work out or understand why the pain's there, or actually do something about fixing it.
Uh,
There are other sort of things you can go deeper into redox, because the other thing about charge or plasma or ether, that mass is actually just charge rotating and gaining inertia. And it relates into things like, we've got these sort of different vortices in the body. Then you can get things like water vortexes, Scharberger's work. And when you create a vortex, it's negentropic, or it's implosive, or it's like a negative ion wind. So once again, in just simple language, it's like this thing that makes a negative ion wind. And I've already said that, like, negativity is what we electrically we thrive on.
mm-hmm.
And people have done experiments of growing seeds beside water vortexes without even giving the seeds the water, and they grow better. And then there are sort of these sort of negentropic, like healing winds in places like Arizona and other valleys and places where it's not the healing water, that people just go, and for whatever reason there's this that they can access, and repeatedly over and over people get better. So with redox, it's just about collecting as much useful charge as possible from all different angles, from everything you can think of, and avoid things which leak charge. So obviously having a bad circadian rhythm and leptin dysregulated would be a charge leak, and then drinking alcohol or not going out in the sun enough, sort of things like that. Then on an emotional level, like you pointed to earlier, we can exchange electrons between ourselves, and some people are mood hoovers, and we can steal electrons from our pets as well. Like they walk outside
Mm.
grounded, and then as soon as the cat comes in, I pick him up and touch his underneath and steal his electrons.
Yeah.
So there's and people that like gardening, just touching the plants when they're grounded, that's going to raise your redox. But a lot of people who love plants and trees and everything, there's all different reasons of why they get health benefits out of them. So I'm just thinking if I've made it sort of like I wanted to give a sort of overview, but also in some ways tell people, oh, this steals charge and then this builds
Hmm.
charge.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I want, is being able to understand. Doesn't mean they're going to stop doing it. Doesn't mean they're going to put their phone down 24/7. We don't expect that, but just being aware that it's doing that and being aware of what we can do to pick up some more of those electrons. And, you talk about pain, and, I know I mentioned that I'm in the fitness industry, but more recently, for the
Mm.
past little over 10 years now, I've been doing my massage
Oh
practice
yeah.
that in the clinic. That's my primary focus. And I do a lot of sports massage, but it's really what I tell my clients is my goal, and what I do for their body is I give the body the stimulus it needs to repair itself. It's not as if I'm working any magic, but it's interesting as you say that the energy exchange that we do have, and I do talk with a lot of them about these quantum things, about grounding, about getting outside more, getting in sync with their circadian rhythm, trying to be up in time to see the sunrise, see some midday sun, see the sunset. And the feedback I'm getting from them is overwhelmingly positive, that they're noticeably feeling better. And my attitude all along is, even if it's placebo, that's still a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. There's no medical intervention, there's no pills, injections, and surgery like allopathic medicine loves to do, and it's just empowering them to take charge of what to do on their daily basis. I would say, as woo woo as this may come across, because I practice all those things: regular sauna use, regular cold plunging, regular grounding. I see the sunrise every day. I eat a very low carb diet. I'm mindful of the deuterium, all those things. I feel like that aura perspective, there might be an element that I'm helping them feel better because I'm sharing that energy from my aura with them. And when they leave here, they start to feel a little bit better. So, I have a sense that whether that's true or not, if they're feeling better, that's all that matters to me. And if that is true, and some people like to say that, massage is just, quote unquote, just placebo, I view that as a beautiful thing, because there's no harm coming from it.
Oh no, what you've said can validate that with science, because you're basically making shareable waves, and those are all of the natural waves which compress well, so they can do the non-destructive charge collapse and be implosive and healing, and they can propagate. There's something called phase conjugation, which is wave multiplying. I won't go into it because it kind of gets really deep very quickly into consciousness and the collective
Mm.
unconscious and all of that. But what you've just said, I could, if I had time, I could probably explain it in physics terms, and I couldn't reference it off the top of my head, but it's completely true. And even people who work in, say, the Reiki space will just say, I need to be a clean channel in order
Hmm.
to help people. And I've just learned there's lots of different ways to explain to people in different ways why stuff works. And like you said, it doesn't matter if it's the placebo, because that's just the person believing in something and being positive and not in a fear mindset. So,
Yeah.
and then about the movement and your massage again with the collagen and the fascia, and how fascia can make electrons because it's piezoelectric. So
Hmm.
there's a lot more to. I think I really highly rate sort of hands-on therapies and face-to-face, and whether or not any people can prove or disprove it works, the patients won't get better if it doesn't. And if somebody's doing it wrong or has nefarious intentions,
Hmm.
people can pick up on the sort of more negative waves. There's just something not right about them and their biology on a deep level, be it the DNA or whatever, because that's sort of very electronic, or the mitochondria have a sixth sense, just notice, and they just don't feel good with that practitioner, so they don't go back, or they did something and the person will say, I was in loads of pain after that treatment. And it might
Hmm.
not have been the actual act of the physical pain, it could have been the environment in which the treatment was done was unfavorable for how the body works on a sort of much more electromagnetic field level, not just a purely lump of meat sort of level. So yeah, absolutely. And also, if you do all of that stuff sort of on a sort of telepathic and mirror neuron level, the patients are much more likely to just start to do some of it by themselves, whether you ask them to or not, because a lot of the time people just didn't know this existed. It's not a kind of mainstream, whereas people know they're not supposed to like drink 6 pints of beer a day or 25 coffees or have chocolate muffins and donuts for breakfast. They know, of course they know, whereas all of this, sometimes people just never knew. And that's why I just think it's worth telling everybody. And even if half the people laugh at me and think I'm mad, there's going to be half the people that think, "Oh, I've never heard that before." I didn't know. Like, people don't know about LEDs, and they know they shouldn't put their phone to their head because it says in the iPhone manual.
Hmm.
And people sometimes do love their phone and their coffee and their cookies, so they can just go and use the phone grounded outside, and it's not going to have such a bad effect. And like I said, a lot of it is people just didn't know.
Absolutely right. And that's what I love about this space, this whole shift from decentralized medicine to centralized and, or excuse me, from centralized to decentralized. And, just it's, I mentioned it before, but it's really this shift to the paradigm from disempowerment to empowerment. And I've overwhelmingly gotten this sense from so many of you in the space that are just absolutely brilliant. And I'm so grateful for you sharing your time with us, that there's always this willingness to share that time and coming from a place of genuinely wanting to help empower people, share the information that we're aware that people might not have access to. And it's really special to be a part of it in some small capacity here and sharing this information with people, because I really believe there's a big shift coming. And I know even that has a little woo-woo vibe to it, but there's something there. There's more and more people waking up to this and recognizing that just eating what feels palatable, what gives them the good mouth feel. They're becoming more and more aware that their body doesn't feel good after that. They don't have the energy that they thought they were supposed to get from consuming calories. They're recognizing that food is so much deeper than just calories. And while they might not understand it, I think because of that awareness, because so many people are in a state of dis-ease, they're far more receptive to information like this, that overwhelmingly is coming from people who live it and abide by it and are reaping the rewards of it. So it's a whole lot easier than sitting down in traditional allopathic medicine doctor's office that is overweight themselves, that still smokes themselves, that is telling you what you need to do when they obviously don't know what to do. So being a part of this space is really special, and I'm grateful for your time and knowledge.
I think definitely that you have to live by example, because I learn lots by just doing it on myself and testing things. And, I don't do it perfectly all of the time because it's not possible. And also, you can alienate your friends and your family, or I used to get too angry before because people just didn't understand. And I just thought, well, I've got like 5 years head start and this is super complicated physics. Well, why the hell should I expect them to understand? And it's my fault for not explaining it properly or showing them, or just a lot of quantum biology is free and you can just do it with other people as well. And also, it's not woo to say about the society changing, because if you look into things like with changes of major religions, every 2,000 years we have a big shift in. We're due one now because I think it was a Piscean era for Christianity, and I'm sure that Jesus was like a phenomenal teacher, Kabbalist and quantum physicist and everything else. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it, but then there's just natural changes. And then I'm reading a book at the moment, The Children of Time, and that's the one about when there's a scientist and she makes a planet like a gazillion miles away, like a terraform planet, and she wants to put monkeys on it with this super mutating virus, so the monkeys evolve into superhumans. But it goes slightly wrong and the monkeys don't make it, and the virus has to sort of work with the insects and everything that's there. So you can see the insects sort of developing sort of societies and things. But it is a lot of these books. And then there's Red Rising, which I've read. It's all about, the earth becoming uninhabitable and us having to move.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of these things that those are just two brilliant books that I've read. And when it comes to fiction or even like films, a lot of the time that's the only way you can sometimes pass a message on to somebody is through like a fiction, which is actually probably true. So there's like numerous of these books, and they different eras, but it's all pointing to this thing about the humans made too many tech, too much weapons, too much poison, and then they had to relocate somewhere else, or they had to learn to come out of their bodies and live as a plasma being without a body. And it's like everywhere you look, and even, you know, you can just look around at the world and think there's going to come a time where we can't not going to be able to live here anymore. And you know, the books that I'm reading are obviously fiction, but then you could see it actually happening if people didn't suddenly start to do anything about it. And right, what we said at the beginning about the food, the whole quantum movement is sort of about embracing nature, making sure there's clean beaches, plenty of places and grass for people to stand on, stop putting 5G towers everywhere. No, we don't want 6G. The technology we've got already is amazing. No, we don't want Elon discs. And why don't we turn off the, you know, our electrics at night, or don't have the Wi-Fi on at night? It's all sort of environmentally protective. And then the whole thing about rejecting sort of excessive use of compounds or biochemistry, and rejecting food that's not food, which is sort of very polluting anyway to sort of produce those things in factories. So it's actually a movement much bigger than just people wearing blue blockers and standing in bare feet. It's actually, if everybody adopted quantum, then the whole planet would become cleaner and more habitable for everybody else. That's sort of the big picture. So yes, the whole thing about, and there is a consciousness shift change, because the more we start to understand the physics of consciousness and how Einstein knew about charge collapse, but he didn't know where the charge went. He didn't know about the compression of a transverse wave turning into a scalar wave that can go faster than the speed of light. So that explains entanglement and action at a distance. And that's why Einstein called it spooky, because he didn't understand. So the actual physics of, say, the quantum field, or, you know, just sort of having the urge to share all of this information, these kind of useful shareable waves are much more propagatable. It sounds like hugely woo-woo, but that's one thing. When people get into quantum stuff, they'll find that all of a sudden they're much more perceptive. They have the whole, oh, I was thinking about you, and then you just WhatsApped me. I was thinking about this this podcast and worried I didn't know enough, and then all of a sudden somehow I just managed to say, and then about 10 people will say, oh, that was the podcast you released was just the thing I needed to hear, and all of this synchronicity happens. And the good thing about that is when you can explain it with physics, it gets rid of all of the nefarious people who just talk a load of nonsense and just want to get people's money. And people can do all of this stuff themselves. There's like endless amounts of sort of activities that our brains can do, like lucid dreaming or telepathy or clairvoyance and all of that. And you don't need to pay some quack, you know, on the internet that's pretending. Why not, like, learn about nature, embrace the quantum, get rid of all of the toxins and the shitty food, and you'll discover for yourself that you can do it all as well. So that it's, like I said, there always has to be a reward, and that might be a very bizarre reward that doesn't resonate with, say, a powerlifter or a bodybuilder, and that person might have really resonated with not being in pain, or eating food more matching to the season, because bodybuilders and strongmen and stuff are really into food. And if there's something that they can do that's going to make gaining muscle or losing fat easier, even just getting rid of blue light, they think, oh, I'm in. So it's, and then there are some people who have zero interest in stuff like that, and all they want to do is develop their sort of spiritual side. So there's something for everybody in quantum biology, but that's because it's nature and natural. It's not like some stupid thing that somebody's, like a movement or a cult that somebody's invented.
That's absolutely right. And that's why it resonates so deeply with me. And, you know,
Yeah.
from the food perspective, I think about it between eating more nutrient dense food, more local, more seasonal, all that type of stuff, and incorporating fasting. I've discovered over the
Yeah.
years that I need far less food every day to feel nourished and good. And, you know, that, as I mentioned earlier, with the whole, industrial agriculture, the monocrop culture, it's all about the line they use is so that we can generate more crop yield to feed more people. But we don't need that if we're eating the right things. We don't need nearly as much volume, and we can feel fantastic. So I love that perspective of there's something for everybody in this space, and for anyone that's trying to understand it better and wanting to delve into the coaching level of it, that's such a vital piece. Is when you're trying to share this with people and coach it in any capacity, you have to know who you're working with and meet them where they are and discover what is it they're looking to accomplish. Because if you go down the path that worked for you and you don't discover what it is they're looking for, you lost them already.
Oh, absolutely. Then back to the food thing. I sometimes think then if they make people sit in blue light, which makes them eat more, and feed them seed oils and stuff that messes up their appetite, of course they're going to want 3 or 2 times the food. So then the food
Yeah.
companies are like, oh, good, here we are. So they basically create their own, like all of selling and marketing is sometimes people create a problem in order to sell something. So if you create blue light and like plastic soled shoes and other things to steal people's electrons or stop them having them or try and block the sun or make sun creams or cloud machines or whatever, then of course people are going to want more food electrons. So then they're going to have this complete nonsense, oh, we need to feed everybody. And then I think I was reading the other day, in a city all over the world, you're only 150 meters from food these days. Where I was a kid, there was like, I had to, if I wanted candy, I had to cycle like 3 miles to a shop, and it had like hardly anything, and half of it, like the chocolate had melted and reformed about 16 times, so it was disgusting anyway. Whereas nowadays people are just like bombarded with food, and then there's the whole nonsense about, oh, you need to eat 6 times a day for your metabolism, and then
Mm-hmm.
like the fasting, I'm really into that as well. It just one thing for people in fasting, they have to rebalance their leptin and hormones first,
Yeah.
and there's a time and a place. And definitely winter is a good time for fasting, just because it's colder and it's a scarcity time. So thank you for bringing that up. But also it's free as well, and a lot of quantum biology is free.
That's my
So
favorite
yes,
part. Yeah, I've got my red light lamp here. There's certain things that we can pay money for, but even that stuff, we really, so much of it is free. If we can just leverage what do we have access to, get outdoors, get your red light from the sun, get all this, go take your shoes off, touch the earth. As I mentioned a couple of times already, it's single digits here, and I was still standing barefoot in my front yard this morning, taking in the sunrise, and just everything I can do to leverage nature healing my body at a cellular level. I'm in. I
oh
want
yeah.
it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And actually, people might be thinking, "Oh, naughty Sarah hasn't got blue blockers on." Well, I've got an incandescent bulb running my lighting here, and I've got a UVA light here, and then I've
Awesome.
got like iris on my screen, and it's on the sleep mode, because sometimes if I turn up in blue blockers with my red light on, because I don't actually like. I'm very much a UV person, or no light at all, or open
Yeah.
the window person. And sometimes we'll turn up for a podcast and it looks like something from outer space has landed. So I'm not doing what I tell people to do, because like I said, there's different ways to do this, because some people wouldn't allow their wife to have a red light panel on in her workroom, and some children won't wear blue blockers because they get bullied. So
Yep.
there can just be other ways to just put things, because with a UV light it looks very pretty and it makes like artwork. Like I've got some UV active artwork ready to put up, and it's very sort of, people don't complain, and nobody really gets upset if you switch a salt lamp on, or an incandescent bulb. But yeah,
Yep.
exactly. There are some people who do want to sit in the red light, and with cold, I always go out for an hour walk and do my thing in the morning, and my mobility and my ceremonies and my exercise and my infinity walk and my all sorts of my grounding, and walking around in barefoot, and people look thinking I'm insane. And then
Yep.
I'll sometimes try and sneak off and find a place where I can just walk around in shorts and t-shirt, and I've got this like vest I bought in El Salvador. But sometimes if you do that, people come up to you and think you're either drunk or you're not well or escaped from somewhere. So people have come up to me and said, "Are you all right? You're not wearing very many clothes." So it's
Yep. I
kind of
get
like,
that
oh yeah,
regularly.
I'm just doing my cold therapy. Oh, and they're like, oh, and but then it's a curiosity thing. If people know that you're friendly and not insane or drunk or high or something, then they'll say, oh, what's. I thought if you're cold all the time, you'll catch a cold. So again,
Yeah.
it's sort of undoing like the mainstream narratives. And if you say to people, oh, cold is really helpful for activating your brown fat, which makes your blood sugar better. It boosts your metabolism. It can boost your neurotransmitters. People are like, oh, no, I'm interested. I'd like some of that. And no, and then like, we won't even attempt to go into like viruses and terrain therapy, but I just can't see how it's just a really unfortunate word that a cold is called a cold. And people
Yes.
just think, oh, if I go outside, I'll catch a cold. It's like, oh, the amount of like misinformation that's just ingrained in people. It takes a long time. So you'll have to sell the cold, otherwise people just think you're nuts.
That's a
Um,
fact. I post on a regular basis when I'm getting into my cold plunge. I did it yesterday. It was 9 degrees here. And I just share it with people because they think I'm nuts, but then they're curious and they ask questions. And the more we can share it with them, saying it once isn't enough. The reason, as you alluded to, that people have all these lines that they say, oh, I thought I'd catch a cold if I got cold. It's programming. They've been
exactly. It's just
programmed to
boxes.
believe that. Yeah. If we can utilize more of an empowerment program, then we can get them to understand that they have control and they can take back charge of their health. And yeah, I'm doing all of that myself as I learn it. And if I read something that you shared recently that with your fasting, you were fasting, earlier in the day previously and eating a little bit later, and now you've shifted it. And I've done the
Yeah,
same thing. For a long stretch, and it was just because of when I was busy in the office. It made it easier to leave house without eating breakfast, get to work for several hours, get home and break my fast at somewhere between 2 and 4. So it made sense for me. But the more I now understand eating more circadian, more in sync with that, it makes sense. And if I'm not doing a prolonged fast, I'm eating a traditional breakfast somewhere in that just after sunrise window. And then I'm done by about 4 o'clock. And I feel fantastic doing that.
oh yeah, definitely. I think with the window, people get super confused, and basically, after sunrise, you've got the UVA rise. So basically, as long as you eat your food before the UVA arrives, it's okay. So like in El Salvador, you have to hurry up a bit because the UVA comes very quickly. Whereas in the UK, I've got like the sun gets up at 8:30 and the UVA gets up at 10:30. So I've actually got a slightly bigger window
Okay.
because it's just when the UV, I mean, I don't, when the UV comes, it just switches on like sort of like neurotransmitters, it switches off other hormones. So it does
Mm-hmm.
make sense just to get the eating done before the UV arrives. So that can be helpful for some people because some people get in a massive stress. Oh no, I can't eat within half an hour of sunrise. And it's like, well, it's the UK. You've got 2 hours to do it and it'll be okay. It's still going to count as a Zeitgeber or a timekeeper, just because the whole sunset in the UK is really stretched out. So I've
Mm-hmm.
actually been thinking to myself, there's a much, people focus on other wavelengths, but then in the sunrise, you've got the violet light, the red light balancing the blue. It's a very healing window. So actually, this gigantic 2 hour window offers a huge amount of healing benefit. And I don't know what it is in New York. It'll probably be an hour maybe from sunrise to UV, or maybe an hour and a half.
Okay.
So no matter what, Mother Nature offers something. And I was only thinking about it today that I know that Dr. Cruz and other people, and just from experience, that this window of morning sun, especially the sunrise, everybody can go out in it and it heals a multitude of things because the violet light does the opsins and it's good for myopia, it's good for proper metabolic reactions to cold thermogenesis, it's important for melanin and skin healing. So this violet light does a lot more, and there's a great big juicy amount of it now in winter before the UVA comes up, because some people will rush out for 5 minutes and say, "Oh, I've done it," and it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
actually, you've just missed a big bonus winter healing thing. And then obviously it's much darker, so there's a big mountain of melatonin we can make
Yes.
as well. So definitely the whole thing, like you said, you doing your morning thing, it's even more important than ever to do it in the winter because it's very tempting to stay inside for longer, and we just have less daylight to go out in because the
That's
idiots
right.
obviously spoil nighttime walks by having lights on all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Finding some way to get out in that natural light, whether it's getting dark earlier or not, is just so vital. And, so you just mentioned something that triggered a thought in me. I have one more question, and
Yeah.
then it feels like we're moving towards the idea of having a second episode, because you mentioned the terrain and viruses, a couple of things we don't want to delve into now. I would love for us to get into that at some point, but
I think the fact I eat raw animal food kind of gives away what I think about certain things. But anyway,
yes, I
what's your
love it.
question?
I love it.
Yeah.
So we've touched upon vitamin D and melatonin a little bit, and we know that, and my understanding here in the States is north of Atlanta, Georgia, there's 6 months out of the year that we don't have the UVB, we don't have that zenith angle to create vitamin D. And, so much of the mainstream allopathic medicine is, in a sense, coming around to vitamin D levels, but they're coming around, and instead of a medicine, they're pushing supplements. And I understand the body's natural production of vitamin D is significantly different than that of supplementing. And I recently learned that the receptor in the body for the vitamin D is actually one and the same of the melatonin. So through the winter, leveraging the darkness to leverage more melatonin is what I'm at the point of understanding. But I'll throw that to you because I'm certain you know a whole lot more than I do.
Yeah, I know Jim Stevenson Jr. and he is like he's got 20 years experience in vitamin D research. So first of all, when it comes to vitamin D we make from UVB, that's
Mm-hmm.
storage D. So
Yeah.
that level is going to fluctuate throughout the year because the storage D is going to, by many processes, get made into active vitamin D, and you can measure that. It's just nobody does. So
Yeah.
really, what should happen is your active D should be the same all year round, around 35 to 40 nanograms. I don't know what it is in
Mm.
millimolar for British people. I'll have to look it up later. So what happens is if you make lots of storage D in the summer, it's going to turn into active D in the winter. So really what people need to do is measure both of them, because if you're measuring storage D, first of all, it doesn't do anything. And secondly, it's supposed to be in the muscle, the liver and the fat.
Yeah.
Why is it in the blood? So some people might just be holding it more in the tissues. And then secondly, it's about, is that storage desulfated? Because the sun sulfates this vitamin because it gets made in the, just under, well, in and under the skin. So it has to have access to the blood to be moved. So it has to
Mm-hmm.
be sulfated to be water soluble. So then it can get to where it needs to go in the bloodstream. So first of all, there's a massive fundamental problem that people are just measuring storage D, and of course it's going to go down in winter because it's turning into active D. And if you measured that, you'd probably find the active D is the same all year round. So it doesn't really matter what the storage D is anymore because there's not just one form of vitamin D, there's about 15 to 20, and
Mm-hmm.
nobody knows exactly what they all do, and nobody knows who's deficient in which one. So if somebody's trying all summer to be outside making vitamin D, even if they don't get to a level they think they should, which I don't completely agree with because it's kind of not feasible really,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to have enough. And then if they measure their active D, they'll probably see they've got plenty of that. If somebody sits inside all day and doesn't try to go outside, of course they're going to have low vitamin D because they're not getting any UVB. Or if people don't understand that you can't make vitamin D at sunset or sunrise, which a lot of people think, or some stupid people, it makes me really angry, this think they can roll up their sleeves in the UK and get vitamin D in 20 minutes, which is complete and utter nonsense. That for somewhere with, say, a UVI of 7 here, you'd have to get significantly undressed and you need a day
Mm-hmm.
without clouds because the clouds are going to block it.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to this, there's also all these different forms of it. And Jim Stevenson he sent me a big massive message about vitamin D4, which I've never heard of. And then there are sort of non-UV active, sort of non-UV vitamin D SNPs that people think may exist, like Scandinavians or people in Finland and Greenland and Lapland
Mm-hmm.
have some kind of non light requiring. Because if you well, I'm not going to go into evolution actually. I just think that people are not measuring the right thing and they're trying to think that everything's vitamin D, whereas actually when you look at low vitamin D causing cancers and illness, maybe low levels of going outside is what's causing cancer and stuff like that. And then with a supplement, hasn't had all the light programming in it because
Mm-hmm.
vitamin D does about 200 things, and everything in the body, like we said at the beginning, there's clocks, and it has to be done at the right time. Then we said that everything in the body, light and electricity, decide how everything functions. So if you make something in a factory, using chemical synthesis. It's not going to have the same level on a quantum information level. It doesn't have any light programmed in it. So it's just not the same. And then for just a sort of simple biochemistry thing, if you take too much vitamin D supplements, you can deplete potassium retention in the kidney, and loads of people are potassium and magnesium deficient, and just stuffing yourself with potassium isn't going to work. Then it'll also, it's very magnesium heavy to change all of that supplement into active D. So then you're going to use up your magnesium, which is very precious. And then it has unfavorable reactions to do with calcium levels in the body. So there's just multiple reasons of why it's just you're dumping this chemical in your body and disturbing an extremely complicated system that nobody fully understands, because we've got sort of receptors of vitamin D in the mitochondria. Lots of these kind of, it's a C.O.A.C.H steroid. So lots of these receptors are heterodimers. So you can get different like kinds of, like a thyroid and a retinol, and they join up and make a whole brand new system. And you can get, say, vitamin D mixing with another one, or it can just be on its own. So there's a whole load of signaling and stuff it does that we don't understand. And then the other thing that happens is if you take too much vitamin D supplement, you stop vitamin A from food, as in retinol, being absorbed in the gut. And we didn't even touch on the central retinol pathway and blue light damaging retinol. So again, vitamin A deficiency, because that again, the retinol is another one that forms all these complicated combinations of receptors. And also people might say, oh yes, well, vitamin A is toxic. It's like, well, why do we have loads of receptors for it then? So the actual messing about with the supplement is going to mess about with your vitamin A status, and then you've messed about with the central retinol pathway. And I just think that's just a disaster. So people are just taking something because they can't be asked to go outside, or some doctor just seems to think they know everything about biochemistry when they don't even know there's more than one kind of vitamin D, let alone 20, let alone sulfated forms. So I actually get quite angry at this, because then this then ties into the whole sunglasses and sun cream obsession. It's like, fine, well, people say, oh yes, but I go on holiday for 6 months, for 3 months a year. And it's like, well, do you wear sunblock? Oh yes, of course I do, and sunglasses. I'm like, okay, well, you've basically not made any vitamin D now, because the sunblock will do what it's supposed to and block UV, and then the sunglasses block the correct sort of timing signals to tell the body to make vitamin D and move it round and put it where it belongs, or turn it into whatever form of vitamin D you happen to need that day out of the 20. So it's a very big topic. And even like every day I'll have some kind of, not dispute, but I was talking to a man in a sauna yesterday, and he was saying about vitamin D, and he was just saying, and I was saying I went to El Salvador to make vitamin D. He went, oh yeah, I just take a pill. So you can imagine what I said next. And then of course there's always the people, oh yeah, I'm going out. I'm going to go outside at 10 o'clock for a walk in the UK in April, and I'm going to roll up my sleeves for 20 minutes, and now I've got my vitamin D. And it's like, you've probably made 20 units, and you need like a minimum of like 5,000 IU a day. So it just makes me massively angry, because first of all, it makes people sick. And secondly, even the Vitamin D Council has a really good informative website on how much vitamin D you can make based on your Fitzpatrick skin type, your location, what time of the day. They still have their fingers massively in the supplement selling pie. So the vitamin D supplement thing is probably one of the biggest cash pigs I've ever come across. And it makes me enraged, as you can tell, because it's almost as bad as, oh, if you go outside in the cold, you'll catch a cold. The whole vitamin D nonsense just drives me absolutely insane. And then there'll be the smart asses who go, oh yeah, well, I take a supplement, but I take K2 and magnesium to counterbalance. It's like, you just don't get it, do you?
Yep. That's the,
So
well, I have that sense they're just as programmed, there's that. For a long time, I thought functional medicine was going to be the answer. Allopathic has been a problem for so long. Functional felt like it was the answer, but
oh
functional
yeah.
feels like rather than using pharmaceuticals, they're just using supplements, but it's all a lot of the same thing in letting people know, oh, here are the tests that we run. Here's where you're deficient. Just take these pills and you'll be better. But it's really no different if we're not learning how nature heals us and what we need to put in, and giving the body the signals that it needs to run and function optimally. That's not happening from popping a pill. We aren't deficient in a pill. We're
Yes.
deficient in nature, in proper food.
Yeah, exactly. And well, I've done the same. Like everything through my life was right. The core must be the solution. Then it must be the vestibular system. Now it must be the myofascial release. Now it must be the hypnosis. Then it's the supplements. No, it must be the diet.
Yeah.
Oh, there's just everything. It must be. Um, there's everything you can possibly imagine. That I've been. Oh, this is the answer. This is the answer. This is the answer. And I've just realised it's like everything. Like loads of things work, but you still have to make sure that you're it's not some really like fundamental basic like um not distilling your water and drinking a load of toxins. There's just like the whole I've done that too about this is it, this is the thing, this is it. But I've learned over the years none of the stuff I thought it still all matters, and there's still a place for like strategic sort of use of certain supplements, but then people don't run
Mm-hmm.
the proper tests. Like if you don't run active D, only storage D, then you haven't looked. And if you don't run vitamin A, you've not run the whole group, because nothing in biology acts on its own. And with labs, it's like you can't just give me TSH, T3, and T4 and tell me, oh, can you fix my thyroid? It's like that's impossible, because there's a whole ton of other markers that all interrelate. And taking just more thyroid is not the solution, because how do you know you're not getting enough not enough UVA? How do you know
Mm-hmm.
your thyroid receptors are not dry with easy? It's like there's nothing that's like I think is truly evil or truly good. Everything all matters in the universe, everything, and it all has
Mm-hmm.
its uses. Even Mercury's useful in its own way. It's just the context, and I think it's like the whole Dunning-Kruger approach to things, and being a
Yeah.
reductionist, and then also forgetting the whole Occam's razor. Like, okay, let's just make things a bit more simple and not just overcomplicate everything. And then but the thing is, I'm sure lots of people have been guilty of, oh, I found the solution to everything. And like in a year's time, you'll ask me about like lots of things, and it'll be, oh yes, at that given time, it was everything about gravity or charge collapse. But now things have moved on, and I realise that it's something else. And then I'll come back to other things, because it does all matter. That's why I emphasized how important movement is, and also
Mm-hmm.
you and food. I don't People who say, oh, food doesn't matter and movement's not important, I completely disagree. And even
Yeah.
though I've taught movement for 13 years and done it all my life, every single day I learn something new about movement, or a new movement for my finger or my jaw or my eyes or my knee, or just like some movement that's very sacred and does something in the ether. So I'll never stop learning. And same with the food. I think it's really important, like you said, that just to find out what's the most basic, simple thing that our ancestors did, and as much as we can emulate that. And if we don't do it perfectly every day, it doesn't matter. You're not a bad person or whatever. It's like, so what? I do stuff wrong. Just it doesn't matter. Nobody cares.
That's right. Yeah, the reason this works is
Yeah.
most of us that are a part of leading the charge, if you will, is we remain curious.
Yes.
We're looking to understand better. We're looking to improve our circumstances. And as we improve our circumstances, we're looking to empower others. And, I think that's the reason the last paradigm really failed. And it failed a long time ago, but not enough curious people were really ready to take charge, I guess, because you've got people, doctors, who are still doing the same thing today as they were doing 2 and 3 decades ago, that it wasn't working then and it's definitively not working now. But this is definitely the shift we needed. And as I alluded to earlier, I'm really grateful to play my small role and have
Oh
you
no,
here
it's
with
like
me.
you don't know, because it's like the whole amplification effect, that you don't know how you might do a podcast and somebody is changes their life, and then they become the next Andrew Huberman of quantum biology. You just don't know. That's the whole
Yeah.
thing. And also I'm the same. I'll happily say the more I learn, the less I know. Like, I don't know exactly what water is anymore, and I definitely don't understand electricity. And mass, well, is it slowed down light? Is it charge rotating and gaining inertia? Is it both? Is it something else? What's a photon? How does an electron move? But then it's one of these things, it doesn't actually matter. That's more of mental masturbation. But on the other hand,
Yeah.
the more you break things down into the tiniest components, the easier I can find that's actually true and that's actually complete nonsense. And the whole thing about being curious and open-minded, I'll never laugh at some new quantum thing or some new light, or you know, or I'll be always open about it, or just constantly sort of looking for more. But it's not nowadays anymore really for me, because with me and my issues, they got solved a long time ago. It's more to be able to help other people. But
Yeah.
then, like you said, I have to do it as well, and I have to like offer something that anybody can do, because some people might have 6 kids, some people might be in a wheelchair, some people might work nights. So you have to kind of know the whole thing and find, okay, you can do this piece of quantum biology, but this is just not going to be feasible, and offer like a selection of things for people to do without overwhelming them, because some people want to do everything tomorrow, and some
Hmm.
people have to do a new change every 3 months. And if you try and force a slow person to hurry up, then it puts them off. And the whole I want to buy everything and do everything tomorrow people, it's like, well, okay, do that then, but it won't work, because you're just like dumping everything on your nervous system. So
Right.
yes, and it's not like small what you do, because I think the more people talking about it from different industries is really important. And obviously, younger people, men, bodybuilders. I'm trying to think of the professions which object to this the most. Electrical engineers,
Hmm.
not necessarily just people like me, or people already in the wellness coaching. It has to attract, especially it's more young people. I'm really, really keen on working with, or I don't necessarily mean helping them, just explain to them, because they really resonate with some of the sort of much more higher consciousness stuff.
Yeah.
And that's a route in for them, even though it might sound like ridiculously woo woo to a 65-year-old power lifter who's also his day job's an electrical engineer, who'll tell me blind, oh, Sarah, of course, like electricity's not dangerous.
Yeah,
I've
absolutely.
worked with it all my life. And it's like, yes, mate, that's why I've got all these problems.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and it's just like everybody matters in all of this. And also, somebody explaining something in a different way
Hmm.
helps, because somebody might watch this and think, what the hell is she talking about? And then and they might have really loved the way you unpacked it and explained it better than what I said. So, it's not a small thing at all. I think it's really important.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot. Yeah, and it's funny you say it that way. I've got a handful of clients that fit some of the descriptions you just gave. One guy pops into mind, and he's been really receptive. He's almost 60 years old. He's still a competitive bodybuilder. And when I share this, yeah, when I share this stuff with him, he's super receptive to it, especially because he feels better. He comes in to see me for the manual therapy, but I also talk about the grounding and the light and blue blockers and all that stuff. And the better he feels, the more receptive he is to more of what I have to offer. So I kind of bridge that gap. That's how I feel.
But also with bodybuilders, they're like the military, that if you can plug them in and they think, okay, this is going to work, this benefits me, they'll straight away make a time slot, and religiously it will be done.
That's
Like the
right.
meal prepping will get done outside grounding, or they'll
Yes.
get up half an hour earlier and go and see the sunrise, do all that, then do the gym. And it'll just instantly become like, okay, I understand, I'll do it, I'll integrate it, and it'll be done every day. And they'll stick to it and they won't complain. If you say you have to do a cold plunge, it'll be done. There won't
Yeah.
be any, oh, it's cold, I don't want to. It's like, if it's going to help them with having less pain after training and help reduce body fat, they're like, right, okay, right, I bought my cold plunge, I found a lake, and I've started. So they actually make really, if you can sort of get round the sort of biochemistry brainwashing that they've had. But also, I
Sure.
still think biochemistry is really interesting, and sometimes all of that stuff with bodybuilding is a route into getting somebody to listen to me, because I know already, and I don't care what people take. I think it's
Hmm.
fascinating, all their stacks. So if I'm totally okay with all of what they're telling me and I'm not going to judge anything, they're like, oh, she didn't say anything about the 5 compounds I'm using. She actually knew what they all were, or maybe I will like, I'll what she got to say now. So sometimes having a common interest can really help as well, and then it's more like a rapport and relatable thing. So yeah, there's plenty of people who I'm hoping to be able to get interested. And even if people just get interested, that'll do for the moment.
For sure. Well, I think that's a perfect opportunity for me to ask then for the people that are going to want to reach out and work with you, how do they get a hold of you?
Oh, I've got loads of things. I've got YouTube. I've got, I'm just putting it all into a podcast now so people can listen. I've got Instagram that's got pictures and sort of reels. Then I've got Substack for people that like to read. I do have some courses. I'm just making a new one, the Quantum Practical, which I meant to finish before El Salvador. I've got a members group that if people want to sort of work that way. But I've got loads of free stuff as well. So there's something for all levels and budgets. And actually, in terms of one-to-ones, or like the group is okay if people join and they don't really know what I do. But I actually really prefer people to have gone through all my free stuff and
Hmm.
understand what it is I'm doing. And they might find that in that solves their problem, but not to come and, not know anything about quantum biology. Because I just, I don't want to waste people's time and my time educating where there's a lot out there.
Yeah.
So yes, I do sometimes do consultations. I'm just, as I just said, I've got too much other stuff to do at the moment of releasing content and then smaller courses. And I'm actually, for about the 25th time, remaking my circadian quantum keto that's got a CPD attached because the company in the UK just keeps rejecting it. And then I keep getting new ideas. So that would be my only thing for sort of practitioners or very keen people that actually want validation and scientific resources and things like that. So there's plenty. And I just go by Busy Superhuman online for all
Yeah.
of my stuff. So I'm kind of
Excellent.
easy to find.
Yeah, so I'll be
And
sure to put that stuff in the show notes. I know I follow you on Instagram and I've got your YouTube channel I'm subscribed to, so
oh,
I'm
good.
fully aware of those and I'll be sure to share them away.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe you just like all subscribed to them all this morning. Just to, no, I know. I'm only
Oh
joking.
no.
I'm only teasing.
Nope, that's why I knew I wanted to have you on and I've been following for a while. Like I said, I got introduced to all this through Dr. Cruz, but
Oh yes.
then just it opened up so many doors to different doctors and so many of you are sharing such valuable information that I'm a sponge. I'm soaking it all up.
Oh yeah. I think with Dr. Cruz, it's like I studied it in depth, so I wanted to know every last little bit. And the blogs are very difficult to read. Stan Winter is like Jack times 100 for difficulty, but on the
Oh
other
wow.
hand, that can put people off. So I wouldn't say to read a Jack blog first. I think his Vermont seminar, Vermont 2017, is a really really good entry one. And then
Hmm.
the three he did with Max Gilhane, that really because sometimes he can just go off on stuff and people be like, I don't understand. Whereas when he actually does a really good podcast like the Vermont ones, anybody can understand those, and there's so much
Hmm.
takeaways, and you can get started straight away. So I think a lot of people start there. The Huberman one is quite hard, but I found that interesting. And then the one he did with me first, that's basically everything that he didn't manage to get to say on Huberman or got edited out, or just weird questions I just threw at him about temporal lobe epilepsy and time travel and quantum brains and stuff like that. So it's kind of an extension. So the one he did with me first is actually quite hard, and it ties
Mm.
well with the Huberman ones, which I think are really good, but I wouldn't start there.
Yeah.
But then, people, they are well edited, as in the really confusing stuff's taken out, but it's not the beginning of the story, the Huberman stuff. I'd say the Vermont one is a really good beginning of the story. I mean, there's loads of good ones. But for people who've never heard of him, definitely you must listen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Many people are referring to Dr. Cow and Alexis as the Jack Whisperer. She can convey a lot of what he says in a much more palatable way that it's quite a bit softer.
Oh yeah, I want to be the Dan Winter whisperer. So I've
I
kind
love
of
it.
I want to because it's one of these things with Jack's stuff. I think it's brilliant, but there's also another big massive piece of physics that really interests me that I think is really important.
Hmm.
And because the Dan Winter thing is it's just like next level of trying to unpack. I've met Dr. Alexis actually. She was in El Salvador. I saw her
Yeah.
talk, which I didn't bring up any of the ketones and the BHB because that's something that she can talk about with you or on her own podcast. I don't want to talk about other people's work, but yeah, I
Sure.
want to be the Dan Winter whisperer. I'm trying to think who else is really hard to understand. I think Konstantin Korotkov potentially could, but he's actually very good at explaining his own stuff. Like Gerald Pollack knows way
Yeah.
more than people think, but he's very good at conveying it in simple terms. Whereas Dan and Jack, it's just like follow me, look up all of the jargon yourself and just deal with
Right.
it, work it out yourself. And if you can't, then, you've been left behind. So yes, definitely Dr. Alexis for the Jack Whisperer. But then some
Absolutely.
of Dr. Cruz's, I think the Vermont one is very well put together, and I think even somebody who's never heard of it, quantum anything before, would be fine with that one.
Mm-hmm. No, that's
It
great.
might They might have to watch it 10 times, not because it's hard, just because there's lots of information there that is new to somebody, but it's all there, and it's just, I think, a really important, like, keystone kind of. It sort of sums up a lot of his like earlier work, because then there's a whole load of like newer stuff that because he doesn't talk about deuterium in that, and magnetism timing and stuff in food. But yes, definitely. Anyway, we've had a very long chat, so I'm not sure if you'll break it into two parts, whatever you think's best for your audience.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. The one with Alexis was about this long as well, and they handled that pretty well. So I think we'll keep it together. But I think there's plenty of other things that we could get into at some point. So maybe there will be a part two in the future.
Okay, well,
But
great. It was really good fun doing this with you, Jeffrey. And I just
indeed,
seized the moment. I seized the day. Carpe, I think, yeah, carpe diem. So
that's right.
yes,
Yeah, I'm very grateful for it. Your
yeah,
time is very valuable, and you shared so much with us. So much apprecited. And audience, I'm certain you stuck around for this whole thing. And if you didn't, it's you lost out. But be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share, all that good stuff, and go follow along with Dr. Pugh as well if you're not already. And until next time, be
thank
well.
you.